Hey everybody, welcome back to the CWI Summer Conference. Thank you for tuning in to all of these live streams we've been doing. This is our third today. Hope you've been enjoying them. I know it's a Saturday morning and everyone's just waking up, but numbers have been good, and thank you for that. Right now I'm joined by Patrick Breen, and we are here to talk about Nat Turner's Rebellion, which you just were on the main stage talking about that, weren't you, Patrick?
I was. Had a lot of fun. Big
Did you?
crowd. We don't usually get a couple hundred people out to talk about Nat Turner, so it was
Yeah.
a lot of fun. You had a lot of people, so it was
That's
great.
awesome. That's awesome.
Right.
What got you started into the story? And first off,
As a historian or into Nat Turner?
and in Nat Turner,
Well, so I was a graduate student. It's actually a pretty simple story. I was a graduate student in the University of Georgia, and I had done most of my work on Virginia, and I was interested in Virginia history of slavery. And I was sitting there trying to bang my head, trying to think about some topic I could do as a dissertation on Virginia history. And that was not entirely just because of my love of history, but also because my future wife, then girlfriend, was still in Williamsburg.
Okay.
So if I did my research up in Virginia, I'd
Yeah.
get a chance to stop by. So,
Right.
I was very interested in doing Virginia history for many reasons. And Nat Turner's one of these great events that everyone knows about. It's taught in elementary schools and high schools, and at the same time, everyone knows only a little bit about it.
Right.
There's not a lot of research done on Nat Turner, and I thought that this would be a great moment to explore basically the power of slavery and the power of the slaveholders. So I wanted to use this as a moment to really explore the relationships of slave and slaveholders.
That's awesome. And I just admitted before we went live that my Nat Turner history is very lacking.
Right.
Because I remember in high school
Right.
and in junior high, and then it just kind of just fell by the wayside,
just
which we do in culture a lot.
It's not only that. It's partly generational too. Nat Turner was one of the big controversies of the 1960s. William Styron wrote a book called the novelist William Styron wrote a book called The Confessions of Nat Turner, which won a Pulitzer Prize in 1967. And as a white Southerner writing the story of Nat Turner and making Nat Turner a little bit crazy and a little bit lusting after white women, this immediately led to responses notably from the Black Power community. There was a book that came out, 10 Black Writers Respond. So if you had been born, I don't know when you were born, but if you were born in 1950
Right.
instead of 1980, you would sit there and say, this is one of those things I know. It's part of my world. And that debate burnt itself out because basically one side was saying Nat Turner's sort of crazy and killed white women and children, and the other side saying Nat Turner's a hero who stood up against slavery. And they'd go pick the sources and they'd throw them at each other, and they wouldn't listen to each other, and there wasn't much of it. The debate didn't move forward. And so by 1975 it had burnt out, and there wasn't really there wasn't much scholarship on Nat Turner for a couple decades. Now you've seen the year my book came out, 2016, there was another book published on it. So there's new scholarship being published on it that is different from what had been done in the 60s and what had been done before that.
And,
So you're not alone.
And you nailed it, because I was born in '80. So by the time the
generational
late
thing.
'90s are over, I'm out of high school.
So now there are, and we were so close to having huge Nat Turner scholarship. I don't know if you saw or heard Birth of a Nation, the movie that came out in 2016.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, when that won all the awards at Sundance in February of 2016, everyone's thinking remember, that movie came out in Sundance, and it's Nate Parker wins all the awards.
Right.
And this is right as the Academy Awards are having Academy Awards so white, or there's controversy because there weren't any black nominees, I think, for
Right.
the
I remember
major
that.
awards.
Yeah.
And so everyone's like, wow, and look at this. This could be next year's Best Picture, right? And everyone thought that was going to happen. And if it had, all the kids who were born in 2005 would be in that sort of Nat Turner space. As it turned out, Nate Parker's movie never followed through with the promise that it had when it sold for $20 million. And part of the problem was he's one of the first casualties of the Me Too movement. He was he had been charged. He and his co-writer of the movie, Gene Celestine, had been charged in a rape case at Penn State, and so there were protests against the movie. And some of the people, and there were lots of people who wanted him to sort of work through the movie, work through this and it's a very tragic story what happened there.
Right.
But he didn't apologize. He may have apologized. I don't want to say, but he really didn't. When you look at his interview on 60 Minutes, he didn't come across as apologetic. And it just became the movie like, this is not the movie we're going to roll out and support. And so Nate Parker's, it could have, if that had been the best picture of the year, then my book would have gone to paperback much quicker than it did. And if it came out in paperback, I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things I'm sitting there saying, it's completely different. And so now I talk to you, you're like, I don't know what happened in Nat Turner.
Right.
And if your connection, you saw Birth of a Nation, that's it. You still don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I did a piece where they were like, okay, my publishers wanted me to do stuff when the movie came out not long. About the same time my book came out. He didn't see mine and I hadn't seen his. But in terms of publicity, I was trying to put things out, and I was trying to come up with some pieces to run. And one of the pieces was like 10 things that got right, and it pushed me because you get to 7 or 8. It's like, okay, this is it. That was a thesis-driven book, a thesis-driven movie, and so he told the story of Nat Turner, the hero. He wanted to be a star figure and tell the story that way, which is not out of line with where the one camp of scholarship was in 1975. Stephen Oates, that's his Nat Turner that he presents. My work moves us in a different direction. We're not. I see Nat Turner less as a hero or a villain, but as a really interesting character who led the most important slave rebellion in American history.
That's an amazing observation of how that historical memory changes, and it mixes with popular culture, and gets involved in all of that, and then that really solidifies why someone like me who studied history for years and years and years is like, I can't remember this story because it's
it was an ID you answered as a junior, Nat Turner having 18, and then that's it. That's all. That's it. There's no story there. But as it turns out, it's a really remarkable story. The story of Nat Turner's Revolt is, I think it's one that really shows. It's this unique moment, so it's not like this is how all slave rebellions were. I mean, there really weren't slave rebellions, not of this scale. This is an unusual event, but it really shows some of the dynamics within the black community and within the white community that you don't see when you're just looking at the regular records of what's going on, going on in the world.
How does that rebellion shake like Virginia? How does that?
Well, one of my arguments is that it shakes Virginia differently than either side thought. If there's going to be 2 interpretations of Nat Turner's Rebellion, the one from 1831 to William Styron is sort of Nat Turner's crazy. Slavery was a sort of, by some people, a great institution. By other, William Styron didn't think it was a great institution, but didn't think it was a particularly horrible institution. This was, and in that view, and that's the view that emerges immediately after the revolt, Nat Turner is just this flash in the pan, and so we really don't have to do anything. I mean, what you need to do is just make sure you don't have crazy slave preachers, and you pass laws against slave preachers and stuff like that. They tried to diminish the importance and danger of the slave revolt, which is really sort of astonishing when we think about it, because after the Civil War and Reconstruction, any rumor comes about, and next thing you know, they're torching Wilmington, North Carolina. It's just the crazy stuff is happening based on nothing. And here it is, there was an actual slave rebellion, and they're like trying to say, oh, it wasn't that big a deal. We have it all under control. The other side is that this is sort of how slavery works, is that, all slaves are ready to rebel, and we just have heroes, and we got to be on edge all the time. What I found out was, obviously the first one's wrong and racist and doesn't make any sense. But the second one is also wrong. When I looked at what happened after the revolt, I see there's a lot of one of the things that the slaveholders are doing is they very, very quickly turn to being scared of the slaves to being scared of the free whites. Slaves, after 2 days of a slave revolt, the slaves posed no threat. In fact, they didn't kill anyone after, they start about midnight on Sunday night, Monday morning. They don't really kill anyone after noon, right? It's a 12 hours of killing women and children and men and, whatever. It killed almost 6 whites. But as soon as the whites find out about it and organize, it's not that big of a danger. What they realized is what the slaveholders realized is after the slave revolt, the danger is whites are scared to the bejesus, and they're going to start shooting blacks. And what can you do? You can't do anything. Like, someone shoots a black, he says, well, you can't do that. What are you going to do? Arrest him for murder? Take him to a jury? And he says, I thought it was Nat Turner I killed. Well, they're going to quit. There's no way of doing this. So after the slave revolt, what the slaveholders had to do was clamp down on the whites from killing blacks. They institute, a week after the slave revolt, they institute martial law. They do many of the things before that, but basically they want to be able to make sure that people aren't killing blacks willy-nilly, because it's easy to see how that gets out of hand. How poor whites who don't have anything to lose start killing blacks, and then it doesn't cost them a thing. It doesn't cost them a thing. So after the revolt, the slaveholders are trying to stop the whites. And the whites are complaining. The poor whites, they write a petition to Andrew Jackson basically saying the leaders here aren't taking this seriously enough. There's people in our own houses who can kill us, which of course there are. But the leaders are like, we're less concerned about the blacks restarting the revolt the day after the revolt, 2 days after the revolt. We're much more worried about the whites coming in and killing the blacks.
Right. And we see that Reconstruction era later on, and it's unfiltered. It's
right. So what happens is, I think that this really gives us one of the things that happens is in Reconstruction, that interest the whites have in protecting blacks disappears. Right? They're sitting there saying, these are the workers in my plantation. Booker T. Washington is basically trying to, in Reconstruction, recreate the slave model where slaveholders protect slaves, right? We're going to have people go out and we're going to be good workers, and the people who run the shop, they're not going to be threatened by us, and they're going to protect us when this crazy lynching stuff is going on. But the problem is, you've got a lot more incentive as a slaveholder to protect your slave than a shopkeeper has, or someone in the market has, to make sure the guy who does your bricks is going to not get lynched. So there's, Reconstruction becomes, you can sort of see how once that interest in protecting slaves goes away, Reconstruction becomes crazy. But you don't want to read Reconstruction back to Nat Turner, because in Nat Turner, the slaveholders did settle it down. They did calm it down. One of the things I do, the estimates for the number of blacks who are killed, we don't actually have like an actual tally of people who are killed. The Civil War, you guys are always like, okay, this is the number of people who died in this battle, and then we're like monkeying with it, and that's great. But in the Civil War, we in Nat Turner, we don't have it. We have list of whites who died, but not list of blacks who died. And so what happened is, as the heroic story came out and the whites are threatened by this story came out, people started expanding. Oh, it was 100 blacks who died. It was 200 blacks who died. And as it turns out, it's pretty clear from the evidence, and I come at this a couple ways in my book, but it's pretty clear that it's about 30 blacks who die after the revolt, which is sort of an astonishing number when you consider that there were, now that's not counting the 20 who were convicted and executed afterwards. But you're talking about, one, the number of blacks died total is on the scale of the number of whites who died, which is sort of surprising, given Reconstruction. The other thing that is, it's also sort of on the scale of the number of blacks in the army. So this is not to say everyone who was killed was was involved in the slave revolt. That's not true, but it's not like most of the people who are killed were not involved. You know, there was many people. You know, the number killed sort of suggest that there was these there were attacks on the black community, and the attacks on the black community, the indiscriminate attacks on the black community were put down pretty quickly. One interesting thing I argue in the book, and this isn't clear, is I argue that people who come from outside the county to put the slave revolt down are killing people more than the people in the county.
Okay.
Because it's their slaves, right? It's when the people come in and say, "Oh, you guys don't know what they're doing," they come in and and I've clearly got examples of this where people are not executed by Southampton. There's a guy who actually has his Achilles cut after the revolt, so he wouldn't run off, you know, and join the revolt, and so they left him there. Now, he posed no threat at that point, but what happened when the people from the next county over came? They tied him up to a tree and shot him, right? And why? Because they thought it was we need to set an example for the other blacks in the community. And so
and stop a spread
and stop the spread of that. We don't want to come to our community, and they're less concerned that if we kill all the blacks in Southampton County, it's not gonna spread to Greenville or wherever.
And they have no connection with that county other than the fact of the fear of that growing out.
Right. And so one of the things I argue, and I haven't done as much work with this, it's sort of a weird situation where in Southampton County, where there actually is a slave revolt, there's forces that are pushing there to be less fear and less of a response. In places where there wasn't a slave revolt, the forces are actually pushing towards more of a revolt. Right, because whites aren't certain there's not a revolt in Wilmington, North Carolina, right, or Duplin County, North Carolina. So they're like, well, how do we show that we're taking this stuff seriously? Well, we go and kill a couple people, you know, maybe torture them and kill them. And so they do that elsewhere, but it's less likely to happen in Southampton County because they know if we start killing people indiscriminately, or even in Southampton County, it's not even indiscriminate. If we start killing people who just did the tiniest little thing, you know, we might be killing a lot of people. And so they didn't want that to happen.
Right, right. And killing more people could lead to more revolts because sooner or later someone could get really upset about that.
Look, genocide is something. We don't have a word genocide in the 19th century. But after the slave revolt, you know, the land shall be deluged in blood. The title of my book is actually taken from the debates that happen afterwards. And they're talking about what happens if it happens again. And basically the argument is we were able to stop the whites from killing blacks indiscriminately after the revolt. But if it happens again, we can't stop it.
Wow.
You know, they're not going to defer to us again. And so the idea is what would happen if there is another slave revolt? They're going to be taking people out, innocent or guilty, and just shooting them. And there's that sensibility. You know, the land shall be deluged in blood is taken from someone who's sort of predicting that is what will happen. But that's not the only person who does it. Says it. This is many people agree. Look, this to stop people from killing blacks willy-nilly after Southampton was an impressive act of control by the slaveholders of Southampton County. And if it doesn't, and it's not going to be repeated if there's another slave revolt. And of course the slaves know this. They're listening to these debates too. If any one of them tries to start a slave revolt again, they know that this is going to just devastate the black community. And so there is no movement for a revolt in following Southampton County. People are laying low, and there's a lot of complaints. In there, when you look at slave narratives afterwards, there's a lot of people, or WPA interviews too. There's a lot of people who are complaining about Nat Turner, not because they didn't want freedom, but because, look, you revolt, what's going to happen? They're going to kill us. They're going to be draconian. And so, you know, there's a sense that, you know, he wasn't a hero. There is, at the same time, you know, there are people who do think he's a hero. You know, like this is something, you know, he's going to die either way eventually. this is not the worst way to go, to sort of go with what you believe.
Right. It's a mentality of better to die fighting than
no,
live,
absolutely.
live a slave.
We don't have the motives of the slave rebels, because the people who were trying to say that there wasn't much just wanted to say everyone was following Nat Turner blindly. So the whites weren't actually pushing to sort of find out why you revolted.
Right.
But Nat Turner, as he's putting this together, he would ask. There was one guy, and I suspect that he sort of didn't trust this. He was from the neighborhood, so he knew him, but he didn't trust him, or they had their issues. And he said, he's like the first guy brought in to the revolt before it even begins. And Nat Turner says to him, "How did you get here?" And he said, "Well, whoever brought me." He's like, "Well," and he asked him, what he wanted to fight for, and he said he wanted to fight for his freedom, and if not, he'd die. And Nat Turner said, "Well, as long as you realize that's the cost, we're ready to go."
Right.
And so, there was, there's a real one of the things that I think that my book does, and that scholarship is doing today, is becoming more aware of the nuance. We've got these ideas of slavery and the white community, and we just sort of want to say everyone did everything the same, and it's just not true. There's really more diversity in the slave community. There's more diversity in the white community. There's fissions that appear if you look for them, and that's one of the things my book, I think, tries to show.
That's awesome. I'm going to read that thoroughly, because I need to go over my Nat Turner history again.
Absolutely.
It's been too long.
Right, and you'll know more than just like your 2 sentences for Nat Turner happened in Southampton in 1831.
Right, yeah. Gotta get to this essay question. With my two sentence answer.
Right.
But let's give everyone the full title of your book.
The Land Shall Be Deluged in Blood: A New History of the Nat Turner Revolt.
There you go. And like I say, I often forget the second part of any title. I don't know why. It's a thing with me. But Patrick, thank you for coming on the live stream and speaking with all of my followers.
Super. I'm glad that people could join us.
Absolutely. It's great to be here at CWI as well. And we have more interviews this afternoon, so tune in later. Thanks for joining us.